Hey everyone, Mayhem here. It's Monday, June 27th. Markets just closed, and I wanted to just provide a little bit of an update. So, I've talked a little bit on my YouTube stream, and also earlier on, I identified a trade opportunity for Trader Aid members in crude oil. And I think that that trade opportunity is starting to really take shape. Now that we've got our subscribers in it, I wanted to mention it to the broader public as well, especially as we're starting to see this trade play out in crude oil. Now, obviously, the trade is still early; anything can happen. But if you look at the chart on screen, you can see that it is pretty constructive. We're making a continuation on a longer-term uptrend. There was a setback recently in prices, but anytime something runs as much as crude has, especially over the last several years, a little bit of give and take is healthy. It's, consolidation, it's profit taking, it's bears and bulls fighting it out to figure out who's got more conviction and money to put behind their vote or their trade. And I think that's exactly what's going on in crude oil here, which is to say that I think that, this is a pretty healthy uptrend. It remains a pretty healthy uptrend. So, when we're looking at this chart here, the one thing that I want you to kind of take into consideration is this volume profile. We're grinding up into and just above, if we can get above, let's call it 112, but we're grinding up into this key area of supply. So far, so good, but we did see some resistance at the EMA 8 today. So you saw that we actually had prices sell down just below there as we closed around 109.57 at spot. And we did bounce off that trend line. It was a clean bounce. It was tested multiple times. We had two fake breakdowns, and then we ultimately reversed bullishly on Friday with continuation today. And I like to see that because it gives me a little bit more confidence what we're kind of seeing in terms of the price action, that trend is still valid. The other thing that I like about the way this chart is behaving is if we zoom this all the way out to weekly, you can see it's really not that overextended. So, crude oil, yes, it did have this insane sell-off. It even went to negative prices. You can see the candle here. And eventually, and those negative prices weren't necessarily really in spot. They were in futures, but you could still see how it pretty much went to zero. Like, there was a moment where, if you had the resources, there were some interesting opportunities in the oil market to arbitrage or otherwise. But, you could see that since then, we've just had this kind of gradual building pattern. It's just kind of very much give and take, but it's two steps forward and like a half step back. So I still feel like this is a constructive uptrend. I don't think much has changed there. The only thing that would change my mind is if we break below this trend line on a like a weekly closing basis especially, but even on a daily closing basis, I would start to get a little concerned because at that point we could see that sellers have the opportunity to take control and turn this into a bear flag, which would probably give me some degree of confidence that we're probably heading into the 90s here. Like basically, if we break below here with some momentum, we get below 100, probably 95, 90, somewhere in that range would not be too unreasonable to consider as a interim downside target in crude, because we've gotten there before. Like every time there was a pretty big give back, I think $94 about there was a pretty decent area of demand. And so on the other side of it, though, I think that as we navigate the rest of the summer, 2, 3, 4 months from now, we could see crude get back to 125, 130, somewhere thereabout. I don't see really why it wouldn't because, demand is increasing. You've got travel season, you've got China reopening, you've got still a lack of supply because there's just a lot of deficit in production. And so I think ultimately there's a lot of room for crude to potentially give the bulls just one more chance to make some money on this trade as a swing. I'm not too inclined to day trade it too much here, only because I think that the better opportunity might be in this swing trade. And I'd be taking it just as I said. Basically, if it's getting below this trend line on a closing basis, I'm out. Other way, though, I'm looking for it to retest that top trend line around 125, 130, and probably sometime, if we're really zooming all the way out here, probably sometime by August, September, right? As travel season starts to wrap up, as demand starts to normalize a little bit, and maybe as we start to see a little bit more production, at least in other parts of the world where they can sort of turn on a spigot versus having to actually do a whole setup and drill a new well and get everything kind of configured, figure out transportation. That takes a lot longer than if you already have capacity. You've just turned down the amount that you're making. So think about that. Think about crude. Think about where it's going. I think we've got a lot of interesting opportunities in different markets too. Another area to consider looking at, I think, might be natural gas, because I think natural gas, it got knocked down due to the Freeport LNG terminal explosion. So a lot of demand for natural gas was taken offline, and so that's caused this rollover here that we've had in natural gas spot. And we want to keep an eye on that because it doesn't look so great from a technical basis here. This is not an amazing chart, but it's not a terrible chart either. It's just sort of reverting back to this primary trend. So it kind of looks like oil in that sense. It doesn't have as strong of a trend line as oil did. It's not as well defined, but it's still decent. So I'm having a look here because it had a nice little pop. And in both of these spaces, I like Devon Energy DVN. But I also am actually considering legging long into some natural gas futures because I think it has more potential than crude to the upside. I don't see any reason why we couldn't get back to $9 in natural gas, as we start to see summer cooling season really start to heat up. There's going to be a lot of demand from power. There's not really enough capacity right there in power generation to be able to fulfill the country's needs. Some states like Texas have talked about the potential for rolling blackouts already. But I think one thing we'll probably see is that natural gas supply is going to be in pretty reasonable demand. And then there's also going to be at some point when these facilities start to come back on in the next 3, 6, 9 months, and new LNG facilities are built over the next several years. Structurally, there'll probably be more demand for natural gas moving forward as well. So it's something to keep an eye on. I certainly think that it's a nice risk reward trade because basically if it crosses under 6, you get out, and you get out completely because you're going to go down to the mid fives there. And you can see it in the volume profile. You could also see it with that trend line. If we break even below the trend line on a closing basis, I would get out of this trade. So on the long side, energy and natural gas look interesting to me. This is something that also there's multiple plays within energy stocks. There's Devon, there's Fang, there's Exxon that can give you exposure to some of these areas. And none of this is supposed to be investment advice or trading advice. Every kind of trade or investment we might put on comes with a risk of loss, sometimes more than you might have even put in. This is just an idea that I'm looking at that I might trade. So hope this is helpful to everyone. And if it is, check me out on TraderAid.com. Only $20 a month or $200 a year. We give out a lot of information to our members with trade ideas, educational resources. We do video recaps that are much more in depth on the micro and macro parts of the market. We've got classes on day trading. We've also got coaching for one-on-one and group offerings. And we've got a lot more coming up. We're going to have a whole library of resources on the site. Charts that have some of my custom built indicators and real-time news feeds and a few other features that are coming in soon. So stay tuned for that and a bunch of other exciting developments that are in the works from myself and some of the other people that I work with regularly. I think it's going to be pretty amazing what's coming down the pipeline. So, stay tuned. And if you want to reach out, leave a reply on the YouTube comments or find me on Twitter, Mayhem 4 Markets, Mayhem number 4 Markets. And also, consider giving this a like and this YouTube channel a subscription if you aren't already. If you do already subscribe, you like the content, please consider, sending it out to some of your friends, anyone that you like, in the trading community that might find this kind of content interesting. The more exposure that I can get, the more I can get out there and help other people. And that's really one of the main reasons I'm doing what I'm doing, is to try to help as many people as I can. So until next time, this is Mayhem signing off. I hope you all have a wonderful Tuesday ahead of you, and we'll be talking again soon.